So what I was going to do was just talk a little bit about mixed reality, and then talk a little bit about how to get started on the Oculus Go, and then maybe the workshop that we're going to have on the 26th, and give you a sense of how we might set that up and what we might look to do on that day. If that's okay. So if you want me to slow down or to stop or to take a different tack, do say it to me, and I'll adjust things. But so what I was going to do is I have a short presentation here, and it just talks about the whole virtual reality side of things, and from the beginning, and it talks about, and I have a couple of videos that I wanted to share with you, just showing different types of applications of virtual reality and mixed reality and augmented reality as well. So, but I suppose just to put this into context is that the way I look on this, virtual reality isn't a game really, and mixed reality it's not a game, but it's a game space. It's a space, and it's becoming a space that people are using to interact socially in, to learn in, to teach in, and to engage with people, to engage with people, and to engage with the world, a way of engaging with the world, which seems ironic. It seems ironic that it's a virtual reality, but for a lot of people, it's an opportunity to get an experience of other places in the world and people that they wouldn't have an opportunity to experience in their day-to-day lives. And that's really one of the key things. And the reason that it's becoming so powerful, the reason that it's moving so quickly, is that it has something that other media doesn't have. Virtual reality and mixed reality, if you were to say what is the defining characteristic of it, that makes it different from social media, that makes it different from Facebook, Instagram, most of the other media, the thing it has is presence, a sense of presence. People are still exploring from a psychological perspective what that means, but it is recognized that that the experience is different when you're engaging with somebody or with something or with a place where you feel that sense of being present and that they are present to you. And some other computer programs, computer games have engaged with this for a long time, and it's been a big thing in computer games, is that sense of presence, and that sense of exposure and vulnerability and interaction has always been part of computer games. So there's a big overlap between the two, but virtual reality, I suppose, is very much to the fore now as a way of as a medium, or as a medium really. And what we mean by virtual reality is mixed reality, and this is the term that's becoming more current, is mixed reality rather than virtual reality or augmented reality. And it's where mixed reality is where you're merging the real and the virtual world, providing experiences, environments, and visualizations, and where physical and digital objects coexist. And I think that's the key thing. Whether you've an Oculus Go headset on and you're playing a game that's a virtual reality game and that's completely digitally generated, there is real world things happening there as well. That's you physically obviously are still in the real world, but some of the interaction that they're encouraging you to do is real world interaction. So things like your headset might vibrate, or the units you have in your hand might shake. So there's different ways that what they're trying to do with it is, even though it's digitally generated, is to pull you back into the real world and to give you that sense of being present. So when you look at it here, and we looked at this the last day, that there is a continuum, and the continuum, depending on where you're coming from, starts either at the real environment, which is the real world, or a completely computer generated environment. So a lot of what you look at in in Oculus Go will be computer generated or video generated, but digitally generated. And you won't when you have the headset, because the Oculus Go doesn't allow you to see outside the headsets. Some of the newer ones do. So you're exposed to a completely digital environment. And then you move towards what's called augmented virtuality. And what that means is that the majority of what you're experiencing is digital, but they interject some real world stuff in it. And that can be real world stuff that's happening as you're having the experience, or it's real world stuff that's programmed into the computer generated thing. So a really good example of that would be perhaps you could use you have a three-dimensional documentary. It's a virtual environment because it's digitally generated film or whatever it might be, but it's of a real world thing. And that's oftentimes regarded as augmented virtuality. Another sort of really strong application of augmented virtuality is where you have, say, you present as an avatar in an online environment, and somebody else presents as an avatar. Now, you're not seeing the person, you're seeing a digital representation of the person, but you can speak with them. You can interact with them. So there is an aspect of reality there, in that you're listening to real voices and you're interacting with real people, but you're not getting to see them. They're actually completely digitally generated. And that's becoming increasingly sophisticated, because what's actually happening now is that with the headsets, and every week you look at it, it advances. Like what we'll use a thing called Altspace VR, which is completely generated, computer generated. So we'll make avatars for ourselves, and those avatars will be like, they'll be like cartoons. They won't look like us. We wouldn't recognize that. They might have some features that we would have, but they won't be recognizable as, you wouldn't recognize yourself in them, or other people wouldn't recognize you in them. But you'll be able to give them skin color and hair and all of that sort of stuff. But now what they're doing is that there's another application. I can show it to you in a second, but what it's doing is it's taking a photograph of you when you're setting up your profile, and it takes the photograph of you and it creates an avatar that actually looks like you. So when you go into a social space playing this avatar, you can look around and you can see people and recognize people that you would know as your friends or as your colleagues, or in a youth work context, young people, you'd be able to recognize them in this virtual environment. So that's increasingly becoming the case, how augmented virtuality happens. And then you're moving towards augmented reality, and augmented reality is a sort of technology that Microsoft is it Microsoft or Google? It's Microsoft. No, Google, sorry, Google. Google is championing. And and Microsoft, the two of them, sorry. And they're championing, and it's where you have a sort of they're called HoloLens. You have like a pair of sunglasses on, and you're looking at the world as you see it through your own eyes, and digital images are projected onto your sunglasses. So you're walking down the street and it's telling you to go right or go left using a digital arrow, or it's pointing out different text related to different architecture as you're driving down the street. So it's quite a powerful augmented, or in the case here, what it's doing on the screen of an aeroplane, it's projecting onto the screen of an airplane various different scenarios. So this real environment, augmented reality is where the majority of what you're looking at is your real environment, and there's a digital element superimposed onto it. So, like, where has it been used? It's when you look at the various different applications, there's an awful lot of stuff happening at the moment. It's moving very, very quickly. Ireland is actually probably, outside of America, one of the real centers for the development of mixed reality. So you have things like interactive product content management. So really what that means is that people are using augmented reality to sell stuff. Really, that's what that's about. So they're using augmented reality to target marketing towards you, or towards people, or to present their products in a particular way. One of the big ones, and it didn't really take off in the way that people had anticipated, was using augmented reality, whereby you'd pass by a shop and the window display in the shop would change according to your profile. So you'd be wearing the glasses and you'd look at the shop and it would highlight what it had profiled you as being interested in. And those type of things will come down the road. Simulated based learning, that's a huge thing. We'll come back to that in a second. But augmented reality, one of the biggest, fastest growing areas, and especially in this lockdown, is how you use mixed reality, augmented and virtual reality for learning. The first application of this was really in the military, and it has been, I suppose, the area where a lot of the technology emerged from the American, global military industrial complex. The really interesting thing maybe about virtual and augmented reality is that the two places that have driven the application of this technology have been the military and, I suppose, what could be called gaming. So Oculus, for example, emerged from lads just wanting to use virtual reality to play games. So a lot, and it emerged as an open source piece of physical kit and software. So the military and the gaming communities have been enormously important in driving this forward. Remote working is another application increasingly that is being used. So mock-ups, then functional mock-ups. So a lot of people would maybe have seen whereby you can use your phone to change your furniture, or look at how a different color might work in a particular room, or hang a picture in the room and see how it looks. So that's all part of how virtual and augmented reality is being used. So I'll come back to consciousness in a second, and sort of a lot of people, it's being used in medical work, not just for training doctors and surgeons, but also for doing diagnostic work, whereby a physician would do a consultation with somebody using 3D camera and a headset. Consciousness then is there's a lot of work going into the psychology behind the impact that virtual reality has on our brains, for a whole range of different reasons, both in terms of looking at how virtual reality might be used to manage anxiety, to support people in with disabilities, with mental health issues, but also things around creativity, stimulating creativity, wellness, and looking at how we might use virtual reality to support people who might not be mobile to experience things and to develop their consciousness about the world outside of the world that they can experience, if they've limited mobility or maybe limited sensory perception. So there's a lot of work being done on the whole psychology and the whole impact that virtual reality has on people's consciousness. And this is, from a young person's perspective, really important as well, because, I mean, increasingly young people are using virtual reality and mixed reality games. PlayStation has a virtual reality headset. It hasn't taken off in the way that a lot of people thought it would, but it's increasingly becoming part of how young people are interacting with technology. Okay, so why is it, like, say, within youth work, within development education, I suppose one of the things that increasingly people are, I suppose, presenting virtual reality as being something that where we need to go. It is really interesting, and just to share with you that there isn't that there are some youth work organizations using virtual reality. Austria, Finland as well. There's projects. So what they're actually doing is using virtual reality to interact with young people. This is way before this whole lockdown came into being, but I've looked at what they've been doing, and it's been interesting, but it's been quite minimal. So it's been, entertainment, engagement. The only place where it has been really, I felt really well developed in a youth work context is interacting with young people who have disabilities. And oftentimes on the ASD spectrum, and how virtual reality can become a good way of encouraging social interaction, even if it's on an online basis. And there has been some good work done in Austria looking at that and how that works. I have a couple of videos I was going to show you, but just before I do, I'm just going to stop talking for a second. Sorry, I'm going to stop talking for a second. Is there anything sort of that I've said there that, I mean, I think 15 minutes is my limit, but is there anything that strikes anybody as interesting, or anything that you think?
I suppose, like all kind of emerging technologies, there's a lot of really cool stuff that you could do with it, but then at the same time, there's a lot of ways things could go really, really wrong when using it with young people. Like, besides from just practical matters of getting the headsets, and that some young people might be made dizzy by it and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's also just, like, for example, you mentioned that there was a particular kind of, I'm assuming it was for something like alt chat or whatever, where it would basically, it'll take your likeness and make a kind of avatar for you.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, from a child's safety point of view, that sounds absolutely terrible. Because then it's like children will be very clearly marked as being children, even to anonymous users. And also sometimes, say for example, for young people, like transgender young people, for example, where the internet is where they can go and be themselves, or
Yeah.
you know, you wouldn't want them kind of like, it would have to be a thing of a choice. And if given like to be, you know, have your physicality replicated in an online environment, and if it is, how many people are going to choose to look like themselves online when you could look like anything? Like, it kind of comes up in Second Life as well. It's like, why be yourself in something like Second Life? You could be anybody, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have a sense
Sorry, I just mute
of
myself.
maybe some of the challenges? No, that's really, it's really interesting, and it's everything you've said is absolutely true, Aisling. There's real challenges in relation to the heightened sense of presence that this type of medium gives, and the vulnerabilities that that exposes young people to, but anybody who might be vulnerable.
Also, just for with young people on the spectrum and stuff, because of a lot of young people on the autistic spectrum are very sensitive to things like sounds, lights, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. There, you'd also, like, a lot would have to be done to make sure that they don't become overwhelmed and that kind of thing. Like, I suppose you could do something like a VR kind of, you know, the way there's quiet rooms.
Yeah.
So you could, you know, there could be like calm down spaces or something. But at the same time, for some young people, even the idea of having to put something on their head makes them really, really uncomfortable. So, but I mean, like, all technologies have their, you know, everything has their bumps. I don't want to sound like I'm like, VR is crap, because I don't think that.
But you
But
do
yeah,
need, absolutely, you do need to be really, as you say, you do
yeah.
need to be really conscious of how this is experienced by people who experience the world differently.
Yeah, I just,
I think
sorry, go
I think that's a really though interesting point that you were saying, Ashley, because the health and well-being, in a sense, it could do the complete opposite to what you're intending if you're not aware that people could get claustrophobic or have a different way of engaging. You know, my ears pricked up when it was all about the health and well-being, and oh, this could be great, but actually you need to take a step back, as you said, and really understand the young people that are going to be putting, say, that headset on, and what actually might that in itself create.
Yeah. I think one of the things, Aisling, you know, or Ashley, sorry, one of the really interesting things about this, and it's just technology, is that, you know, Zoom, for example, like Zoom meetings, some people find those, I do, I have to say, find them much more intense than face-to-face meetings.
Yeah.
You know, there's a sort of an intensity to them that is almost anxiety inducing because you're tuned in a lot more closely. So VR can be the exact same. You know, the sense of presence can be enormously intense, more so than it might even be for somebody entering into. So you walk into a building full of people. When you're walking in a physical sense, you have a degree of control. When you're walking in a digital sense, for some people, it can be overwhelming.
And you've also got, I suppose, that, well, in terms of the Zoom, not only your face and how you're looking, but also the environment you're in. You're letting people into your space more so. If you go into a public realm, you can kind of hover in a corner or stand behind your friends, or there's a very different.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, that kind of with things like Zoom and VR, that sometimes there isn't that sense of that you have your personal bubble.
Yeah.
Like you would in face-to-face kind of things. Yeah, that's interesting.
Absolutely. And what you know, there's, I mean, I think Zoom has given us a good education into, in some ways, that like Zoom can be recorded. I'd often, you know, so there's a vulnerability associated with that there isn't necessarily in social interactions in real world, as can any you know, digitally created VR experience. So what you're doing and interacting and reacting to in VR, you know, may be recorded and may be published, or maybe, you know, so there's.
How does that work in terms of data protection?
Well, I mean, say in terms of data protection, like say, generally speaking, you know, in terms of recording, I don't need to declare that I'm recording, you know. So if somebody's intention is malign, if you know what I mean, then it's very easy for them to record digital interaction unbeknownst to anybody. And there is huge data protection issues there, but it still can happen, and it still can be, it can be published regardless of whether you were aware it was being recorded or not, if you know what I mean. You know, so I suppose there is an awful lot of safety issues that people need to understand before entering into this type of space. And I think it is, in terms of looking at digital virtual reality and augmented reality with young people, that's heightened. It's heightened because the experience is, I mean, you do need to be conscious of how people are reacting to it. This is why in the current environment, I'd be sort of really cautious of using virtual reality with young people that you don't know well, because you don't know what space they're in when they're using it. Would it be okay if I went in and I showed you a couple of videos?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to show. I have 3 videos here, and I'm just going to sort of put this up. What I need to do first is I need to share audio from the computer. Share computer sound. Okay. So the first one here is, it's a project called Engage. If you Google VR and education, this crowd will come up, and they're based in Waterford. They're probably the world leaders in the use of virtual reality for education. And I know that we're not in an education space, but the video sort of shows the power of the virtual reality the types of context that virtual reality is being used in from an education perspective. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. That's cool. Okay, so I'll throw this on here.
We all experience the world in unique ways. Through our senses, we gather information and build cognitive process to understand concepts. This is how we learn. But what if we could push these boundaries past our physical world? What if you could communicate with anyone in the world, yet feel like you were in the same room? If you could meet and learn.
Why would you make me put it up the highest?
You tell me when
from teammates globally, sharing media and ideas. Or jump into a simulated training.
But the real test is being able to do the right thing in a stressful situation.
To gain a deeper understanding of the task at hand.
And when you're squeezing the trigger to squeeze the bag, you have ventilated the baby, and now it's time to reassess.
Please fasten your seatbelt, sir.
Creating real-world scenarios, improving employee knowledge and skills.
Exactly, plant another tree. And this time we put it up the top.
Imagine if quality education was accessible to all, regardless of geographical location.
Large hazard and increase the risk to these big cities.
What if no field trip is too far or impossible? A world of immersive experiences. Engage, communicate, teach, learn.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to move on from here. Okay, sorry. Okay, so what did you think of that? Just as a sort of an introduction to what can be done in virtual reality, sort of by way of education.
It's very like futuristic, and I don't know why I get like, when I see stuff like this, I always get a bit afraid for like the future, in a sense of like, oh God, we're going to be like taken over by all these like fake things in years to come. But yeah, no, it looks fun and cool. I think like young people like will love this type of stuff, you know. But like that, what Ashlyn was saying earlier, just about the protection side of things, and I suppose we need to work on that. But yeah, it looks deadly.
Did you notice, Aaron? I suppose the thing that struck me about that a wee bit is that the avatars, the characters, were actually sort of not quite photoreal, but they were. This is one of the sites where they actually take a picture of you and create an avatar that looks like you. And obviously you can adjust it, but so their whole model is that it's to give you a sense of you being you in that space, which is strange. Did anybody else get a sense from it that you said, yeah, brilliant, or God, oh, I'm not sure about that?
I think as the headsets become more accessible, then it can potentially be a really kind of democratizing sort of technology in that way, that you know, more people will have access to things like, you know, like a VR college course, you know, there's a lecture on or something. But just because it's so new, it's kind of like 3D printing. It's capable of amazing things, but you know, it's just accessibility isn't where it needs to be.
You're absolutely right. And I think one of the sort of interesting things about it as well is that, one of the interesting things about it is that, you know, when the technology becomes financially accessible, like the Oculus Go isn't enormously expensive. It's about €200, still expensive, but none. Is that things have moved on now, and the Oculus Go is old, whereas the technology, the current Oculus Quest is maybe €600 or €700. So it always seems to be pushing out the boundaries in terms of affordability. So it's whether people who, not just getting access to technology, but getting access to good technology or technology that's usable. Has anybody else any other sort of, I mean, just say concerns about it as a way of doing education, as a way of interacting in that sort of space? Is there anything anybody would feel we need to be cautious about?
But where does it work? Like, is it a closed room? Like people outside of, like if you're doing a youth work program on this here, like there's no way like people outside of that could access it, kind of thing, and like.
That's really interesting, Tracy. Yeah. And the answer is yes and no, because it's like everything. If you pay for the application, then your privacy settings are more respected, and you know, so, but generally speaking, now you can make stuff invite only, so you can create events that are only available to people that you've directly invited.
It's kind of like Zoom in that way. Like Zoom is quite vulnerable to getting not so much hacked, but just getting kind of, the code can get out there if you share it with somebody that might give it to somebody else.
Yeah.
You can get your meetings kind of crashed by bored young people.
Absolutely. It is, and if you pay, you get more security on it. But yeah, so it can be. You can set it up so that you specifically use it to meet one-to-one, or you can set it up so that it's public and pretty much anybody can come. And a lot of the, I suppose, challenges associated with VR is the vast majority of the social spaces in VR are public. So you could be meeting, interacting and talking with anybody who could be pretending to be anybody. So it's very difficult. I find it disconcerting, but it's something that takes a little bit of getting used to when you're in social spaces.
It kind of reminds me of like the early internet. Like when I was very young on the internet and there was like chat rooms and stuff, it was like the Wild West, and so different to now. I mean, the internet's still a dangerous place, but it doesn't feel as lawless as it used to. And maybe VR is kind of like the new frontier in that way.
And I think you could be right. I think VR, a lot of the applications in VR that are public free applications are a bit like Second Life was, or a bit like maybe say some of the chat spaces were, and people are using it to explore. And it's an unusual space right at the moment, but you'll get a sense of that once we go through the workshop the week after next. Could I show you another video? This is just another type of application that you might usefully use the VR headset to, and I'll talk about this particular one after you've seen it, if that's okay. Yeah. Okay, so this is a BBC production called We Wait.
Oh yeah.
He is tired. We are all tired.
They were supposed to be here an hour ago.
Maybe they don't come.
Okay, so that's a video. It's called We Wait, and you can't really get a sense of it there, but in VR it's 360, so you're actually sitting on the boat or on the beach. Any response to that? I know we only saw very little bit of it, but any sort of response to it, or any sense, anybody, what your impressions is of that visually even?
I'd say if like young people are playing obviously visually because they're so used to playing PlayStation with such high graphics and stuff that they might be a bit like, oh no, what is this?
Yeah.
It does actually look a bit scary, you know, especially if they like go to school with people that they know like are refugees or living in them type of areas, you know.
Yeah.
It might be a bit daunting to them. Yeah.
I think that's enormously important. It's enormously important to be conscious that you may be portraying an experience people have either lived through, or friends of theirs have, or families of theirs have. And that's a very, it can be a very questioning, a very uncomfortable, disconcerting thing if somebody has had direct experience of it. Absolutely, yeah.
Then from the other side, it's quite important, I suppose, for other people to feel that the experience, you know, I'm kind of going back to say, thinking of history class in school, like we had such a boring teacher and I hated history. And as I got older, I was thinking, gosh, I really, like, it's extremely interesting, but if there was more of this where you could step into and really feel what's happening, or connect with the empathy side of things, I think, you know, in one sense, it could be quite traumatic and quite intense, and like that is quite scary. But then on the other side, I think it could build empathy as well.
I think, Ashley, people would talk a lot about the potential for these types of experiences to generate empathy. What I would say to you on that, which is really, is that in itself, maybe it won't. Maybe actually in itself, but I think what, as part of a process of discussion and an engagement with an issue, it can be enormously powerful. So the whole thing of introducing an exercise like this, debriefing from it, discussing it, sharing feelings, I think it can be, and what it can do, which is really interesting, not only does it bring out maybe people's empathy and people's sympathy and people's humanity, or it also brings out the bad, negative side as well. You know, the discussion that this type of experience can evoke can create hostile responses, and you need to be conscious that that might emerge from a group. But one of the things, Erin, you mentioned, and I think it's important as well, is that when you look at the graphics on this, it's quite primitive, it's quite clunky, it's quite cartoonish. And I think that can be very good, or it can, and one of the reasons that it's very good is that what it can do is it can give psychological distance. So what I mean by that is that if these people were photoreal, what you'd be concentrating isn't necessarily on the story or the experience or the words. You'd be concentrating on that guy's beard, or that woman's hijab, or the color of that guy's, you know, that there's too many distractions oftentimes when you have a very realistic experience like this. Whereas when you create this in animation, you only put enough in that isn't distracting. Does that make sense? So it allows you to create the experience with more control. So that's we wait. I'll just move on to one more, and I sort of looked for this, Ashley, just to give you an experience of, say, an artistically focused application, and there's loads of them out there as well, but this is just one that I just came across. So this is on virtual reality. This is just an app you can buy.
Okay.
Sorry, so that's I'm accidentally stopped it a little bit prematurely there, but you get the idea. So the idea really is that it allows you, it's an interesting one in that it allows you to create graffiti in a virtual cityscape. That's one thing it does.
Wow.
The other thing it allows you to do with your phone is photograph a wall in a real world context, and then superimpose graffiti onto it.
Wow.
Really good for planning street art.
Say again?
Be really good for planning street art, like.
Yeah.
Or like, if you were given a mural, like you were commissioned to do a mural, it'd be great if you could take the photos of the actual wall itself and plan it out. Because I just saw there you could choose from even like established kind of spray can brands, so you can even make sure that your color palette is correct to what's available to you and everything. It's really cool.
Yeah, and it allows you to do a painting by numbers style. So you can you can
So you don't
actually
have to be a graffiti artist, so to speak, or
you can just follow a template, or you can actually do it freestyle yourself. So it's sort of, yeah, it's.
Can I ask how easy are those type of things? Obviously, you can download an app for that, but if you wanted to create something like that yourself, is that very, like, that must have taken years, wouldn't it?
Let me see. That sort of one is more difficult, and what I was going to do, what I'm going to ask Adrian to come in and talk a little bit more with you about that. But creating apps, it's much. Sorry, let me see. It's easier than you'd think. Augmented and virtual reality. That augmented, there's a lot of app development software out there that can help you make stuff, but to make it to that type of quality is quite expensive. But it, sort of using virtual reality to create spaces, the most straightforward thing, Ashley, this is what I would say, is that a three-dimensional camera, most 3D cameras now can digitize. So you don't have to create the physical space. You can take photographs, and those photographs then can become the basis for a three-dimensional environment. The hardest thing about creating those apps is, I think, creating the storyboard that goes with them, to know exactly what it is you want the app to do or the game to do, and what are the limits of it. So I think once you know what it is you want it to do, it's possible to learn how to use programs. Even like Unity is a really, really versatile game creation, animation creation software, and it's not that hard to get a handle on. But the difficulty is oftentimes the initial idea can be either unrealistic or undeveloped, and people sort of start off on a project and there's no end to it, because once you get into it, once you get programming, and it just goes off on a direction that maybe is interesting but is never ending.
Yeah.
So I think the big thing with these things is to have a very clear idea when you start to do a brief, have a very clear idea what it is you want it to do, and to stick with that. But it's not as hard, it's not as challenging. I mean, you obviously have played with different types of technology. It's not as hard as maybe it appears.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll get Adrian maybe to do a taster with you on that.
Right.
Will I just talk a little bit about the units that are coming into you? And what you might need to do. It's reasonably straightforward. Any of you that have opened it, I think Anya, did you say you sort of started up the process of getting the Oculus Go up and running?
Yeah, I charged it, batteries, put in batteries. I tried out one or two of the apps I downloaded. It was actually just one. It was the Jurassic Park one.
Oh, right, yeah.
So you basically you're standing in a forest, and a large dinosaur wakes up and goes to eat food around you, or eat leaves off the trees around you. It's pretty amazing, to be honest. It was pretty easy to set up. Now I'm trying to remember now. I downloaded the app on my phone first, and then I waited for it to when I turned on the Oculus, then like the home screen was there as well. So once I tapped the app on my phone, you can pick from the library whatever apps you want to download, and then download it onto the Oculus, and then from that I could go into the Oculus and select it.
Yeah, so it's really what happens is that the phone brings the Oculus to life. In some ways, the app on the phone. So really, all you need to do, I'd say, it takes a while to charge. Generally speaking, maybe the one I have anyway takes 4 or 5 hours to charge. So leave it charging for a while. There is if you wear glasses as I do, and I've lost my one, there is a little foam spacer that goes in, and that allows you, because the Oculus focuses based on your head position, your eye position. But if you wear glasses, it pushes you slightly further back, and it allows the screen to be a little bit clearer. If you have glasses, yeah, it works okay. You wear glasses on you, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and I put in the spacer, all right, and it made a difference.
Yeah, it does make a difference. It's not perfect. I think for somebody with contact lenses, maybe work a little bit better. I'd wear contact lenses occasionally. I just find it works better a little bit. But the other thing I would suggest that you would do is if you had a headphone, it works. The whole experience works a little bit better if you put in earphones, or if you put a headphone on and just plug it into the side. It works that bit better. And then what you'll need to do is you're going to get the little controller, the little I can't find mine now, but you get the little controller, and you just need to click it off. It can be a little bit fiddly, but just need to click off the casing and get the batteries in, and put on the lanyard on it. There's a little rope on it. The other thing to remember, there is a cloth in the pack for cleaning the lenses. There's little plastic films on the lenses that you need to pull off. Mm-hmm. It doesn't, you can use it without pulling them off, but it makes it better if you, obviously it's better if you have them off. So the thing, this is then, so once you have it charged and you have the hands, the little, the pointer charged, or the battery in it, sorry, it doesn't recharge, it's just a battery in it. You need to go to either Google or iTunes, and it will ask you to set up an account, and you can set up the account, I think, through email or the usual options. If your phone, I mean, like I was chatting with Adrian about this, and he was saying this Adrian does this in our college. He's never had a problem with students not being able to use their phone to upload the app. It may happen. So worst case scenario, you might need to use somebody else's phone. You might need to use somebody else's phone if you have a very old phone. But all that really means is that what the phone does, once your Oculus is up and running, you really don't need your phone anymore. So what the phone is used for is to wake the Oculus up to your Wi-Fi and just get it registered. So on your phone, once you have the app uploaded, you turn on you have to make sure that your Wi-Fi is on your phone and your Bluetooth is on your phone. And the phone will talk to the Oculus, and the Oculus will wake up, and then the phone will ask you a couple of questions. The app will ask you a couple of questions just to get the Oculus up and running. And then you can put the headset on and you can start exploring using the headset. And you don't need the phone anymore then. You can use your phone, but you don't have, I use a headset here, and the phone that it was originally set up on is in Thurles, I think. So it's just really to wake the whole thing up is what you need the phone for. Does that make, so it is reasonably straightforward. And as I say, what I was going to do next week was set you a few tasks to do between next week and when we have the workshop, so that you'll have done some stuff and you'll you'll have had an experience of it, if that's okay. So that's where I wanted to finish up today. How's everybody doing?
Right.
That sound okay?
Yeah.
That's all grand.
Okay. Great. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just sort of pause that. Sorry. Yeah, so that's